Hey guys, welcome back to the Lit Mag Lab podcast. I'm Jazz Marie, aka Vevna Forrow. So previously on the podcast, I was giving you a tour of Saber-Tooth Tiger magazine, yeah. And prior to that, also covering, again, another literary arts magazine in existence and taking the time also in some past episodes to answer a couple of questions in the comments. So totally listen back to that if you're interested. And don't forget, you can see my screen out on YouTube, Spotify, and elsewhere. And totally, whichever your preferred platform is. Yeah. Now, on this series, just a reminder again, I have also covered a number of submission management systems in existence and also various tools, tips, and topics. And one of the topics we will be discussing, I sort of mentioned this a little bit on the past episode and across the series, from time to time, is expedited submission fees, right? So we're going to talk about that. And I guess the question of the day will be worded like this: are expedited submission fees unethical, unfair, and a waste of money, right? Are they? So I guess you could say that's a yes or no question. And for me, are expedited submission fees unethical, unfair? And yeah, there is an element of unfairness to expedited submission fees, right? In the case that, not everyone has, $3, $5 to spare, every dollar counts for everyone, typically, right, in this world, right? Not everyone has that money to spare, some expedited submission fees are $10, or over that amount, like $25, right? Totally. And that I feel is tough, because some lit magazine journals, ones that are print based, I would say, right, they have limited spots available in each issue, right? In that case, right, of someone choosing an expedited submission, option, right, and jumping to the front of the line for a decision, right? Let's say someone who didn't choose the expedite submission fee, right, had a stellar piece, really phenomenal, right? And that, perhaps didn't get chosen over the one that chose the expedite submission fee because they got a faster decision. Both pieces are awesome, but that person, paid an expedite submission fee, right? And again, regardless whether you pay an expedite submission fee or not, that shouldn't weigh in on the decision. It comes down to the quality of the work. But in the case of, let's say there are, multiple awesome submissions, and one person chooses that expedite submission and snags the last slot in a print issue or something, then, that does feel, like there was a, that's not an even, field, right? And it shouldn't, again, in the lit mag world, feel like that, pay to play. Personally, I'll share, you know so back when I was really submitting to places, a couple years back, I mentioned on the series, right? Yeah, there was a time with like one lit mag, for example, and multiple others that I tried, right? Expedite submission options. I had submitted to one place, chose the expedite submission option, was like $3, and I got a decline. Then I tried again, also did the expedite submission, right? $3. Tried again, right? Because that was a decline, and same lit mag, right? Again, decline, right? And I, $3, $3, $3, right? That adds up quick. I lost about $10, right? And over time, right, totally, those additional options you choose, while submitting to lit magazine journals, like expedite submissions, right, things of that nature, right, those fees can all add up fairly quickly. Again, I've seen, over the years in, social media stories and things of that nature, where poets track, and writers, artists, right, track their submissions, right, the fees, the amount, the time they submitted in an Excel spreadsheet. Aside from chill subs, tracker and a few other trackers I've discussed on the series, submittable has a way to track as well. Other, ones, right? Duotrope has a tracker and things of that nature. But oftentimes poets still, again, as I mentioned, right? I did an article type up on this and also mentioned this in my guidebook. Poets will create Excel spreadsheets, and I've seen some, a lot of fees stack up quickly, like several $100s, gone all to submission fees and expedited submission fees, collectively. Some poets totally have done that. And, you can lose a lot of money, submitting to lit magazine journals, in a year, totally. It can happen, it's a gamble you're taking, right? Totally. Now, I recently myself, right, with my own lit mag, I mentioned, right, last year, I discontinued our, fee structure, where it's free for first time submitters and then second time or more face a fee. So I discontinued that structure back in July, if I recall right. And then this year, I have, for now, I have discontinued our expedited submission fee option. And also, I mentioned, right, I temporarily stopped having volunteer staff, and I'll state why further in a future episode because I am totally dealing with some rather heavy events personally still to this day. And I've shared some personal shares on this podcast and some other things, right? Totally. So eventually I'll get to that portion, but I'll discuss more so on the expedited submission fees, why I discontinued that this year. For now, I just, I don't like expedite submission fees, to be honest. I mean, I'm not saying that lit magazine journals out there, there are quite a few out there, that, have that expedited, submission option, right? For others to get a decision back, again, it could be 24 hours, for some have that, they'll get a decision back to you in 24 hours. Some have it set to 3 days, right? 72 hours I've seen, or 1 week, right? Or 1 to 2 weeks, And, I just didn't like that, myself, I think as a founding editor or someone, looking to start your own lit mag journal, I think a good question to ask yourself is, would you choose the expedite submission option, right, yourself, And I think nowadays, in this world, right? Not just like in the literary arts world with magazines and submissions and stuff like that, but we have, just in this is an analogy, right? So, like for instance, when others order online, when others, do DoorDash or Instacart or whatever you're using, right? There's an option, right, to get, next day delivery or same day delivery, right? Expedited delivery, right? For example, right? When you order a product off of Amazon or wherever, right? There's a option, right, to not wait several weeks. Sometimes you can speed up the delivery, right? And there's that aspect of like when you're doing that with like orders and delivery and stuff, right? Is it a want or is it a need, right? When you're ordering a product, right, from a place and choosing that expedited delivery, rush delivery, think about it, is it a product you really need? Like you couldn't live without it? Is it an emergency need, right? And think and yeah, associate that almost with like expedited submissions, right, in the lit mag world, and ask yourself this: are you, doing the expedited submission fee because you need it, right? Is that a need or it's more of a want, right? I would say if you absolutely, can wait it out, right, with a submission, and wait for that decision, it could be, some places it takes, right, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months even, or a full year to get back to others, right? And I would say if you can wait it out, you could save a lot of money for sure. Those expedite submission fees can add up quick, so think about, what you could do with like, $3, for some may not be much, but it can add up. There's some places out there, like on my screen, you may be seeing Cleaver Magazine, right? They have an expedited option, right? I'll go, I'm on their website right now. So if I toggle over to their submittable page, right? Cleaver is Philadelphia's international literary magazine since 2013. So we scroll down here on their submittable page that I pulled up, right? We'll go to, right, paid expedite submission, right? They have it a bucket for each category, right? A flash, fiction, creative nonfiction, and poetry, right? Paid expedite submission, $25 a piece, right? So $25, and yeah, so that is fairly high, right? For sure. Now, Cleaver Magazine is the only one that has a $25 expedite submission fee, right? There are other ones out there. And not to say, again, I'm not saying any lit mag or journal that has expedite submission fees is bad or anything like that. No, there are a lot of really cool, awesome lit mags and journals out there, no doubt. that still have, expedite submission fees. Whether lit mag or journal is a nonprofit or not, right? Again, totally, there are fees, there are costs, operational expenses, unless you were to like, right, run it solely off of, let's say, Substack, or converting a blogging space into your lit mag or journal, which some do. Then your costs are very minimal, or almost zero, right? If it's completely online, like on Substack somewhere, right? But a lot of lit mags and journals, have operational expenses, and some lit mags and journals, and lit mags and journals, absolutely, some, out there, right? Again, right, to pay writers for their work, things of that nature, right? And yeah, so and are volunteer based, totally, right? So typically, Cleaver magazine, right, says their response time is generally 2 to 4 months, right? And for fiction, flash, and essays, and 2 to 12 months for poetry. It says occasionally they will respond much faster, and they have a completely volunteer based staff, right? So yeah, again, if your submission gets lost or in the filters, right, or it's been lingering in the queue for too long, you can reach out. So, I would say again, if you can, and they have a general submission fee of $5, So I would say, $25 is quite a lot. If I ever saw that with a lit mirror journal, expedited option, I would just wait it out. Let's say I coughed up, $3 or $5 for the submission fee, right? I would typically wait it out, because that $25, that's quite a bit of money, think about it, that, yeah. So I'm not saying not to do the expedite options when you see it. I'm saying ask yourself, is this something you really want to do and can do? Like financially, is it going to hurt you, if you do the expedite option, right? Or, have you set aside money, for your lit mag and journal submissions, and stick to a budget maybe, if you're going to submit to places with fees, minimal fees, right? Nothing super high. I think $25 is on the higher side for an expedited submission fee, no doubt. So I typically, wouldn't do that myself personally, that, I think, how I've restructured things on my lit mag for now, discontinuing expedite options. Back when I had it, right, and it started off with Dippity, I called it the Tomorrow People ticket. So that, I tried to do, 3-day decisions and stuff, and then I switched it to 1 to 2 weeks, right? And changed the name to Splash Pass, right? Most lit magazine journals call it the Fast Pass, or fast, track submission, option. But I tried to sort of match the lingo of Dippity, so I called it the Splash Pass. So for now, the Splash Pass is temporarily also discontinued for now. I restructured it in the sense that the other options in place of the expedited submission is for writers to additionally to choose, between seeing their score or seeing both their score and a summarized comment from, an editor, right? Myself, right, being the founding editor. So if they would like that, right, I think that has more value to it. Something someone could take away from it, right? Getting feedback and scoring, right? I think that's valuable. Jumping the line, if you're a lit mag or journal, right, some lit mags again are run by one person who does it full time. And in some cases, right, some lit mags have really fast decisions and turnarounds times, on average, and it doesn't make sense for them to really implement, right, a fast decision, or some expedite response options, right, in that case, right? But yeah, totally. A lot of lit mags and journals out there that sometimes they're getting several hundred submissions a month, or several thousands for a call. And, sometimes it's really hard, to wait for a decision back, to wait several months for a decision, Back when I was submitting to places, I, was going through a lot of traumatic things, very personal, heavy things. I still am today, some very heavy things. And I was like, I'm just going to go for it. I'm just going to see what happens. I was learning how, things are in the lit mag world. I wasn't really aware of a lot of things, several years ago compared to now. So, I would say again, if you can wait it out, for a decision, totally wait it out. And if it goes past their average time, Chill Subs has a great, average time. You can see, what a typical response is given back. The ed reported one is typically entered in there. And of course, lit magazine journals will, of course, tell you their anticipated time range for a decision, and if it goes beyond that point, yeah, totally reach out. And yeah. And sometimes totally something that happens is that decision letters get lost in your emails. So it is a good idea, to always I always recommend, checking, whichever submission management system the Lit Merit Journal is using, go into your account and see. You should be able to see the statuses and filter and see the decision letters and stuff too there. If it got lost in, your email or someplace. Totally, that's happened to some writers and artists totally as well. Yeah. So how Cleaver Magazine has it set up right now, what I like about, again, my lit mag or journal, I'm not trying to push submission man systems on anyone, but I think I do see a great benefit of having one. It just makes life easier. I feel like it's easier to organize things, to set up calls and windows and dates and times, and to keep track of everything, for sure. So the thing I like about Subfolio is that, again, there's a cool feature, right, where you can configure the call. Let's say you do have an expedite option or something of that nature, right? You can easily, have that tagged, when it's submitted and chosen as an option, right, by the writer or submitting. And you can have a tag appropriately label attached to that submission, color code it, and then it can route, let's say it's one that's meant for the editor's eyes only, like a direct decision from the editor, right? You can have it route directly to them on the back end, which is really cool. Or, have it assigned, to whoever you need it to be assigned to, right, for that specific option they've chosen. Maybe it's expedited, maybe it's feedback, right? And yeah, so that's really cool. So I like that there's not really a need to have, buckets like this, like back on submittable, right, to do that. And it's easier to keep track of things, like that, I feel, for, things like this, right, on Sofolio. So yeah, for now I've discontinued having an expedite submission option myself. I've discontinued our splash pass for now. I don't know if I'll ever bring it back, or, for now, I think it's more valuable for others to get, feedback and like a brief summarized comment and scoring. And then, I have a separate bucket for detailed request as well, which, detailed feedback request. I think there's more value from that, than just like having someone, skip the line or get a decision back in 24 hours, or 3 days, and that things of that nature. Now, in some cases, sure, we didn't have several hundred to choose the expedited option or anything like that when I implemented it, briefly, and tried it out, right, at Dippity, right, the past year or two, right. There were, some poets, like maybe, a handful only who chose that option. We didn't have several hundreds or anything like that choose expedited submission options. So yeah, absolutely, there are some writers, artists out there who will choose the expedited submission option, but I think it is a option that can, it can be costly. In this case, right, $25, I think that's quite a bit of money, you know so yeah. Um yeah, so it says, here, if we expanded on Cleaver Magazine, right? So you may pay a volunteer submission fee to expedite the reading of your manuscript, or, this case is a flash, right? Submission, right? Payment does not increase your chances for acceptance, but it does go a long way to help them sustain their quarterly magazine filled with twackingly fine cutting edge fiction, poetry, essays, and artwork. So yeah, a lot of lit magazine journals, use that option. I mean, like, what they get from expedited submissions, right? Fees, again, to help with covering operational expenses to help sustain the magazine. And then, also, those choosing that option, right, get a fast decision. But yeah, and yeah. So it says $25, right? The submission for $25, submissions receive an expedited reading with a guaranteed response, accept or decline within 2 weeks. Generally faster and often in less than 1 week. It says, yeah. So, I think whenever lit mags or journals say guaranteed, and things like that, I think it should be, specified somewhere on the website. I'm not saying, I haven't checked with Cleaver Magazine or anything like that, but just in general, I mentioned this, right? Anytime you have fees involved or anything of that nature, um, like options like this, I think it's a good idea to state whether or not, a refund would be provided in the event that, it's past that time. I've always, given a refund anytime it's gone over, right, 1 to 2 weeks, or if it was missed or something, and wonky with the, let's say, back on Submittable, right? One time, something wasn't appropriately routed or, found or identified, right, as a fast option, right? And it was really hard for me on Submittal personally to juggle expedite submissions. So much easier to do things like that, on Safolo, I feel like. And even some other submission man systems I've covered in this podcast, I don't know to the extent of some of the other features they're working on and things of that nature, but totally, check those out too, right? Ola, Dapple. But I think Saffolio was one submission man system that was fairly easy to grasp and really had all the features that I was looking for, in terms of, structuring things and having that flexibility for sure. Yeah, so yeah, anytime you have fees, right, I think just mention whether they're non-refundable or not, and in the event of when refunds would be provided, like expedited submission options, I think if it's past that guaranteed point, right, I think it's only fair to do a refund, right? And yeah, so I think it's much easier to tackle refunds again on some other platforms. Submittable, I wouldn't say it was easy or anything to do that. Oftentimes, a lot of lit magazine journals are still resorting to going outside of Submittable to, do payments and things of that nature. So, like Subfolio, it's easy to centralize like payments to writers, and also fairly easy, right? There are quite a few submission man systems, right? Dapple, I believe, also uses Stripe, and some other ones out there, right? Totally, where it's easy to facilitate a refund, right, from your Stripe portal and back to the writer, or artist, whoever, needs a refund. It's not, complicated or anything like that. I don't know if things will change one day of Submittable and things of that nature. They're constantly adding and adjusting features for Submittable. So I left Submittable again and migrated to Subfolio, right? So it's I think it's a fairly low cost and very flexible submission management system packed with a lot of great features. So I always like sharing, platforms and tools that, make anyone's life easier. I feel like Subfolio absolutely does that. Yeah. So again, not trying to push the submission management system on anyone. I'm just giving, my thoughts on, this. So I'm going to show you a couple other examples of expedite submission setups, right? And yeah, and this one you can see is from Cleaver Magazine again. Yeah, so we're gonna go over to Split Lip Magazine. I'm on splitlipthemag.com, and you can see here we scroll down, right. They have, right, one to submit under this header, of how to submit, right, and one to submit under this header. It says free submission windows, right? So they have a free submission period of free submission months, right? So they have free submissions, right? So there are certain months where submissions are completely free, right? And sometimes they have to shut free subs early due to a rad but overwhelming response. And they have a free sub cap, with Submittable, right, when it maxes out. So yeah, so they're saying January, March, May, September, November, and then yeah. So I can't remember what tip jar submissions was, with Split Lip, the mag. But you can see here they have expedite submissions, right? And for $5, it says they'll make sure they get back to you in 2 weeks. Expedite submissions, again, don't guarantee acceptance. Sometimes they close expedite review in one or more genres to catch up on submissions. If you don't see it listed as a submissions category on their submittal page, it means it's temporary close. Yeah, so, in this case with Split Lip the Mag, theirs is $5, And again, expedite submissions, again, they do not guarantee an acceptance and they shouldn't have any weight on, again, the submission, right? It comes down to the quality of your work, how it fits the call, what the Manga Journal is looking for, right? And I cover, things to take in consideration, right? When submitting to lit magazine journals, my experiences, right, in my guidebook, and some of the other things I discussed in the series, of course, creativity is what a lot of lit magazine journals like to see, right? For sure. And other factors, right? If the call, some calls, right? I'm not talking about Split Lip the Mag, but some calls out there are themed and have very specific guidelines. So obviously, I've seen this in totally some cases, some poets, right, have chose expedited options, right, and then they obviously didn't follow the guidelines, right? They submitted something completely irrelevant to the call, or submitted way more than the amount of poems asked for. Be very cautious. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Even the same applies to submission fees. Just because you pay a submission fee, just because you choose expedited submission options, and just because you donate a large sum to a lit magazine journal, right, that doesn't guarantee an acceptance. That shouldn't weigh on the decision. It's going to come down to the quality of work, right? So I would say, totally, some writers, poets, artists, right, like for instance with Subfolio, right, there's an optional tip jar you can enable, right, and others can adjust their tip and change it, if they'd like. But again, optional, right? It should be optional, right? Tips shouldn't be required. Same thing, those shouldn't be required at all, right? If a literary journal has a submission fee, that's different, right? In place, right? But tips should be optional, and yeah. So, just be very cautious, whenever you're dealing with submission fees or expedite submission fee options, right? Just be very cautious when you're dealing with fees in general, right? Read the guidelines very carefully, read the Living Journal's policies. If you have a question, right, totally, it's important to reach out to make sure your question's answered. And yeah. So again, they have a $5 expedite option, right? So again, just another example. They're not open right now with any calls, Another one is Poetry Online. And you may recall them from episode, I think it was 37. Yeah. I think they've changed their website and their logo icon since I last checked them out. So you can see their website looks different, and yeah, than before. And yeah, and they changed the icon or the logo here, for Poetry Online. So I'm on their submittable page right now, so you can see this is an example, right? So Poetry Online has it structured on their submittable, right? For example, poetry and prose expedited $3.14, right? So yeah, and you can see, right, that this would be an expedited decision on yeah. So yeah. Now I can't remember what it said. I think it's a good idea to state when the expedited. They used to have it, I thought, where they told what how fast the decision would be right on the call. Um yeah, I don't remember. So yeah, so I don't remember where that was, but I recall when I had um back when I submitted to Poetry Online way back, right? They had, um, I think they said 3 days, expedited response. So I don't know what it is like this. I think it's a good idea always to state when the expert response is going to be received or guaranteed, I think here, right, and things like that. So I thought they had it way back where it was different, or somewhere specified on their website, unless I missed it. So I don't know what the time frame of this one would be per se. It could have been 3 days, or of course it's going to be faster than what their usual response time is. So yeah, you can see they have, right, a $3.14 expedite option, and then a no fee poetry and a video art, right? So yeah, I think that's really cool that they do visual poems and have a call like that. That's pretty neat, by the way. No fee to that. That's awesome. So yeah, you'll see here, right? They haven't mentioned how, right, they pay poets, right? So um, and it states, right, again, they pay $60 per poem at Poetry Online. Um, they said they only pay by Venmo for contributors in the United States, and international contributors may receive payment via PayPal. So yeah, again, there are totally some submission minute systems out there today where you don't have to resort to that so much. Venmo and PayPal. Like I really like how like with Portfolio, like payments to contributors and other things, can be all centralized through it, right? You don't really have to worry about that, using multiple different payment options. No doubt, not everyone, not every poet in existence or everyone perhaps, leverages, right, PayPal or certain payment options. But I think it's nice to be able to handle that all through, right, one submission management system. And I think that's what the downside is absolutely with Submittable, right? That problem, right, still, because on the most basic plan, right, minimum of Submittable is that payment payout feature awards feature was submittable is not accessible to most lit mag journals and presses till today, well, as of presently, as when I'm speaking, still July 2026. So that's why I feel like there are better submission management systems out there, for a number of reasons. And I think it's easier to juggle expedited options when you have those, or any type of expedited option, additional options, even feedback, and to have that tagged and routed right to the editor, right? Or whoever's managing or overseeing those on the team, right? And yeah. So, anyways, that's another example of one. And I'm gonna go back to another one as an example. And this is a bull. So I'm on mrbull.com. So I'm not too familiar with them. Um, but Bull is dedicated to rewriting modern masculinity. Bull is dedicated to rewriting modern masculinity from the voices that most often get drowned out amongst the shouting and posturing, voices that struggle in silence and shame. So, yeah, and it says here, right? It mentions things about adding trigger warnings and who they publish, and yeah. So I'm not too familiar with Bull, but they came up in a search result. So yeah, I wanted to check out how they were structured, and I was just curious, So I'm scrolling down, and yeah. So you can see here, right? Bull has it where it says tip jar submissions, right? So yeah, so this is not a good example, I think, of how to have it worded, because I think this could be confusing to others, when you associate tip jar submissions and put like flash prose 999 words or fewer, right? I think it should just state, right, flash submissions prose 990 words or fewer, $3, right? um it's confusing that tip jar is attached to the submission, right? Because typically what I've seen some lit magazine journals do, right, sometimes they'll have additional check boxes, right, for tips, right? Or they'll create a separate bucket for a tip jar, but I feel like that shouldn't be associated with a submission. It should just be tip jar, right? And then flash, and like the one above it, right? I think like that without the tip jar on it, right? Yeah, so I think that bucket is confusing, right, for flash and prose that we see here. And yeah, again, they have tip jar 24-hour responses, so I don't think this is appropriate wording necessarily. I think it should just state 24-hour responses, $6, and then a separate bucket for tip jar. Like with Subfolio, some other submission man systems, even Dapple, I think, if I recall right, there's an option to toggle to intake tips, right? So it's not really necessary to have it structured in that manner, like compared to other. So yeah, um, yeah. So I think it's best just to say 24-hour responses, and then to have maybe a separate bucket for tips, yeah, because I think that could be confusing, to others, like you're giving a tip to them and then you're getting a fast decision, right? Is that what it's saying collectively, right? So yeah, I think it'd be best if tip jar was taken off of these last three, and if it just said, right, 24-hour responses, $6, and yeah. So yeah. It says for, yeah, so this is good what they state here though. They said for this they guarantee 24 responses or will give your money back. So they do state refunds, right? So they do state refunds. I like seeing that. That's great. Um, Again, it says while they are committed to keeping submissions free, right, like many other lit mags, right, that do struggle to stay afloat, right, financially paying for web fees, print costs, right, it's a labor of love, always will be, right, all funding. I'm quoting this off the submission page on Submittable, right, that they have, right. All funding for submissions goes strictly into building and maintaining the Bull brand. And if you like what they do, right, and have a fiver to spare, right, and want to help ensure that they continue what they do, right, that you're grateful for generosity. So, yeah, I think it's just confusing to attach, right, tip jar to these three here. Like, it should just state Flash Pros 990 words or fewer, Pros 1,000 to 3,500 words. Looks like there's a brief typo there. Um, yeah. So, yeah, and that happens sometimes. I've goofed up on when making some calls sometime in the back, and then my volunteer staff was like, "There's a typo there." It's like, "Thank you for catching that," because sometimes that happens, so it's no big deal. But yeah, I would think it's just better to have 24-hour responses, $6, and then a separate bucket entirely for tip jars, or even like you can plug in a link, on the submission landing page to like Kofi or buy a coffee too, or something of that nature saying tips can be provided here, or you can submit to our tip jar bucket, and there's an option, separate option for 24-hour responses. And yeah, so yeah, so I don't yeah, so I think that, yeah, so they actually do have separate, buckets, right, for flash fiction without fees right here, right? Fiction, creative nonfiction. So I think this should just be converted, perhaps to a tip jar, yeah, because that shouldn't weigh in on the decision, right, at all, if someone chooses these options, right? I'm not sure why it has, right, Flash or Pros here and Pros over here, right? I think it should just state one bucket for tip jars, you know. Um, I think that could be confusing. Well, that's confusing for me anyways. And yeah, and then just 24 responses. So yeah, if we go out to the submittable, discover opportunity page, I'll show you guys something here. Um, Again, be very mindful. I mentioned this in episode, I think it was 51. I was talking about whether or not you should pay reading fees, and I showed things to watch out for. Even when you select no fee, I don't know if Submittable is ever going to address this again. There's still some lit magazine journals when you toggle in, right, that they actually do have some required fees that they've, plugged in there. And again, tips should always be optional, right? Those should never be required, and there's some publications on here that still to this day I don't think they've addressed that, and Lit Mag News mentioned that as well. And I shared that, right, in episode 51, and also talked about submittable, right? I think it was episode 35, the submittable overview episode. So 35 and 51, I was talking about submission fees and whether or not you should pay them, right, a little bit further. So you can check out those episodes if you want. But let's go to let me just type expedited, as a keyword. Let's see what comes up, right? And I'll untoggle this because I had that selected. So yeah, you can see what comes up when I choose expedited, right? You can see a lot of lit mags and journals, right? Quite a lot actually have set up expedited submissions, right? On expedited response, you can see, right? And on the, discover opportunities page, right? So, we have OK Donkey, right? Black Warrior review, Three Elements review, right? And you can see the range of them, right? Some are showing $4, some are showing $5. Black Warrior review is showing $10, and the historian showing $20, right? So you see there are varied amounts, right, for expedited options, right? And right, this one is showing 1 week expedited $3, So yeah, it varies, in the lit mag community for sure. The expedited, submission fees, and totally it can add up, if you keep choosing that option, for a fast response. And yeah, so something else we'll search for here on Submittable's Discover Opportunities page, we'll do tip jar. and we'll see how many lit mags have created tip jar buckets. So yeah, you can see there are quite a few lit magazine journals that have tip jars. So I don't think it's a good idea to have the category with the tip jar in it. I think it's just good to say tip jar, or to have tip options and optional check boxes. I like more so how you can structure it on Subfolio. Much easier, right? For sure. To add the options you need, for, tips, and to enable that, and to again set up expedite options if you want, as a founding editor, or anything, additional feedback, and add, additional add-ons, right? So yeah. Anyways, you can see that's how, one way you can see, some have totally created separate buckets for tips, but I wouldn't suggest doing, categories, naming, with like, submissions and stuff. I think it should just strictly state expedited response and a separate bucket if need be for tip jar, and things like that. But in reality, I think, it's Submittable has till today some finicky things on the back end that make it hard to structure things, so I feel like Subfolio solved a lot of the headaches I had personally, like with a lot of the things I was struggling with, and getting things to, you know be structured the way I wanted to, right? In terms of the optional stuff and routing that appropriately, when you have a team and things of that nature, right? Totally. So, anyways, yeah. So, yeah, basically, that's it. I'm just trying to give a couple examples of, expedite submission fees and tips, So, expedite submission fees, and yeah, I don't know if I'll do a separate episode on tips and, and things of that nature. If you're not a nonprofit, right, lit manga journal, again, right, you should be very careful and stick to just saying, tips, right, or tip jars. Only really nonprofits should use more so the word donations. You'll, may run into trouble with some platforms or services, and integrations if you're not a nonprofit and using the word donations, right? So it's better to use, right, the word support or tips, totally. Again, just a reminder, it's okay to have expedite options, but I feel like, you know again, I'm not saying any of these lit mags or journals are bad that have expedite options. Only poems, for example, only poems, let's go to submit, right? Only poems, I've covered this on the past, right? Oh, and some music was playing on the site, so hopefully it didn't cut out, but I paused it on their website, onlypoems.com. And yeah, so I'm going to go here. Let's see. um we're just going to click on one of these. So we're going to click on Poet of the Week, right? And let's take a look here. So yeah, this is how, Only Poems has theirs, right? I'm going to scroll past see they have optional, right? Tip jar. I'm going to scroll down further. So yeah, you can see they have optional tip jar, right? And then, right, they do additional add-ons, right? Optional, all optional, right? And that's a way that can help support your lit mag, right? They give other things, right? And that could be, in the sense, editorial feedback, right? They, again, as I shared, right, 99 bucks, 249 bucks, right? They have options there, extensive markup, right? And then, one full page, 99 bucks, right? And yeah, and handpicked lit mag submission racks, they do things like that, right? Additional add-ons. And yeah, so yeah, I'm gonna go back and click on Poet of the Week again. So let's click on this again. So this says fast response Poet of the Week, so through so it says, right, send up to 10 pages of poetry, though their general response time is 3 to 4 months. In this category, they will reply within 2 to 3 weeks. and then the honorarium rate is $100 as of July 2026. So yeah, you can see how they have it structured. Again, I think this is a tally form, how they have it set up. And yeah, so you can see then they have an optional tip jar, right? I think that's a better way to have it formatted, right? For sure. And same thing like Safoli, you could do that with. I think they're using tally forms, like built-in forms for this page, and their website integrated into it, right? And yeah, you can see again the optional ones I just stated, right? Editorial feedback and two additional pages, right? 10 hand-picked Litmax submission recs, $50, right? And yeah, those add-ons, right? Those totally help. So, for their fast response quote of the week, the fee is it looks like $10. And yeah, so again, I'm not saying any lit mag or journal is bad for having fast response, fast track response passes, fast passes, or expedited submission response options, right? There's different names lit mags and journals use for it, or have nicknamed it. But most commonly is expedited, response, fast response, expedited submission, right? Options. So, it's totally up to you if you want to do that, you know it's a gamble, essentially, a little bit, totally, risk you take. In this case, if only poems, right, and their fast response poet of the week, right, let's say you do end up, getting an acceptance with them, right, the honorarium is $100, so let's say you lost $10, right, let's say you did end up getting acceptance, right, then you gained $90 basically, right? So yeah, it's sort of that, calculation in your mind. So they're letting you send up to 10 pages of poetry too, so you know um in the cases where lit magazine journals are paying writers and offer honorariums, I think that perhaps is a bit better, in the sense that, you may have lost money, doing the expert response, but in the event you do get an acceptance and, they really like your work, let's say it works out, right? And there's an honorarium on the other side of that. But in most cases, what I've seen, there are a lot of lit magazine journals that, out there, there aren't, several hundred thousands of lit mags in the world, that pay writers for their work, right? And yeah, so, think about it that way. But still, ask yourself, can you do without, right, the fast response? Could you wait it out, doing like regular options that they have when those are open, right? The other calls they have, right? Can you wait it out, however long it is, right? Can you wait 3 to 4 months? They have other calls open across the year, right, that I shared in the episodes. But typically they said their general response time is 3 to 4 months, and this is like their fast response option, right? That is, it looks like currently enabled and available. So if you are someone who absolutely, doesn't like fast response options, you want to start your own lit mag or journal, or you feel that expedited submission fees are unethical and unfair, you could do something like only poems. Think about this, right? They have all these other options, tip jars, right? Editorial feedback, right? They even have optional, right? 10 hand-picked lit mag submission recs for $50, right? And totally, I'm sure some poets out there, some submitters have chosen these options, and that absolutely does help a publication sustain itself, to be able to pay writers, do honorariums, host fun events, things of that nature, can help fund things and keep things going. No doubt, lit mags and journals, facilitating events, regardless if it's solely online or not, there are expenses there, and being able to pay writers for their work, and yeah, so everything adds up, for lit mags and journals too, their operational expenses. So you think about other ways, I always say, right, make sure you exhaust all options. And totally, I've tried quite a few things with my own lit mag journal. Make sure you exhaust all options before implementing, again, submission fees or other things, like that, and see how it works out, right? I think, of course, in some cases, some of these, in some cases, totally, some poets absolutely will not, pay expedited submission fee options, right? They won't do that. They'll just wait it out or wait for general submission windows and be patient and things of that nature. But, again, it's really up to you if you want to cough up, whether it be $3, $6, $10 to get a fast decision back. So yeah, again, every Lit Magazine journal's, submission page or landing page is a little bit different. It's so totally, every Lit Magazine journal's setup is a little bit different. There are some similarities across some, but again, I think Only Poems does a good job, I think, of really being creative with additional options and doing other things. And yeah, so Only Poems and a couple and other Lit magazine journals I've covered in the series, totally, there are some that I've shared, right, that absolutely have been creative in facilitating other things, to keep things going, right. And as you can see here, right, there are those additional options again. I discussed Only Poems, their original website and structure, right? I think it was episode 80, and then I discussed some of their calls and things. Further, their new website design in episode 112. So you can listen back to episode 112 on Only Poems if you'd like. And some things, of course, with Lit Magazine journals change over time, over the years. So just keep that in mind. And after dinner conversation, I've covered them on, I think it was episode 89. So I'm not going to reread everything again or anything like that, but you can see on my screen afterdinnerconversation.com / submission dash fast dash pass. They have, a fast pass submission option. Again, reminder, right? So they state, right, they tend to average 2 to 3 months to read and respond to a new submission. If you purchase a fast pass, you jump to the front of the line. Only after reading all of their fast pass submissions, they will go back to their regular submissions, right? Or if you are a yearly digital print subscriber, your store is always moved to the front of the line. Accordingly, fast pass submissions to expect a response in 3 to 5 business days. And then again, I reiterate this is great, right? So it says here, right, are my chances of getting accepted better if I use the FastPass system again? Nope, right? They state this on After Dinner Conversation. You get the same exact reading and consideration as everyone else. You just get read first, right? You jump to the front of the line. So again, I think it's always a good idea to, um, think about mentioning, refund policies and things of that nature when you're dealing with fees, whether they be optional or not. Um, and then they state, right, again, as I mentioned in that episode 89, why $25 seems like an odd amount. It's matter, they state here, of striking the right balance between getting a few people to pay to help support the publication, but not so many. That says we can't stick to a 3 to 5 business day turnaround. And yeah, so they have, a secure checkout, that they have here, right? So it's a bit different after dinner conversation, right? This is like a purchase, right? And yeah, and then they have some reviews there, I think, as well. They have that, and then you go to, right, the online submission form that they have, right? And again, there's additional services optional, right? The Fast Pass, right? 3 to 5 day response free for paid subscribers. Fast Pass 3 to 5 response $25, and then they have feedback and critiques for $80. So yeah, you know, um, it's also mentioning here paid subscribers get 2 free Fast Pass submissions per year. So yeah, I think that's that. To me, I think that's a little. I don't know. I can't recall how After Dinner Conversations is keeping track of that. I think that's kind of hard, personally. I think but I think with Subfolio, it's, I think, much easier to juggle things like that when you have multiple different options and you need to route it, or someone's choosing, different selections like that. You need to route it to, whoever's overseeing, right, the fast decisions. Typically, it's the founding editor, right? It goes straight to the editor in chief, right? In most cases, with fast response options or however the masthead is structured, right, at the Lit Mag journal you're submitting to. Yeah, so they have the short story submission form. So Only Poems and After Dinner Conversation, they have form based setups like embedded into their website. I believe, right, Only Poems is using tally forms, and I think tally forms is pretty cool. And I can't remember what After Dinner Conversation was leveraging for this, but Yeah, so just some examples of fast passes and other additional services options. Again, so I would say if you find you know expedited response options unethical, right? you know think about adding some other additional services, and maybe that's just feedback and critique, or sharing reader notes. Some lit magazine journals have that, sharing readers notes being a free option. Some of them have that as a paid option, or share scores of that things that nature, and it's really up to you, if you want to cough up money for an expedited response. When I do it, after everything I've gone through in the lit mag world and experiences and things of that nature, personally, I would not choose the expedited response option. Back when I was starting off and submitting to places, yeah, I chose that expedited submission option. I chose it at a lot of lit magazine journals, when I was really getting into submitting and things of that nature. I lost a good chunk of money, submitting to places, I would say myself. And yeah. And again, I was going through a lot of really heavy events and things of that nature. So I was like, I want to, get a fast decision and see, where this goes, like, and things like that. And never, with the ones I did expedited, options are, all declines, for sure. And there were other places, right, I'd submitted to, right, that allowed simultaneous submissions, right. I just waited it out. I waited one time. I was waiting and waiting, and I was in a midst of thinking about, and this place had no fees or anything like that. I was waiting and waiting, and I was about to pull out my piece. I think a problem I made quite a bit back then was withdrawing too quickly on a lot of pieces, and I was about to withdraw on this one piece that had been sitting for quite some time, like it was almost like 6 months or something. And I was like, maybe I should just withdraw this. But I ended up waiting and waiting, and it actually got an acceptance. So there are times where it does take lit magazine journals quite some time to review submissions, and if you can wait it out, patiently, and wait X amount of months, however many months or weeks it is, totally, you might save yourself a good chunk of change, and maybe you could do a lot with that 25 bucks. Or let's say, even, let's say someone, submitting the places, right, and chose the expedited response option. Let's say it's 25 bucks there, 10 bucks there, another 25 here, that's like 50, 60, $70, it can add up, right? Places, you're spending $6, 25 bucks, $3 here, expert response, another 10 there, right? 25, 25. It can add up really quick if you're doing that expedited response option quite a bit, right? You can lose a lot of money for sure, over time. It can add up. You could, think about what you could do with that money, right? What other things you could have done. Totally, there are some really awesome stellar lit magazine journals, right, that have expedited response options. And that doesn't mean, again, they're bad at all or anything like that. There are some lit magazine journals out there, that do, right, a percentage of them, right. Not every single lit magazine journal in existence charges fees, or offers feedback options or things of that nature, additional services. But you know and yeah, so you could do quite a bit with that money, right. Again, not every lit mag, I'm not saying every lit mag journal existence that implements fees, submission fees, or even has additional optional expedited options. I'm not saying that lit mag journal or is bad at all or anything like that, or even presses. And it's just a matter of, I think, for a lot of lit magazine journals, right, the ones that are right, giving honorariums and paying writers, and having operational expenses, right, and have hefty monthly bills, right. Lit magazine journals, again, have to get creative with a lot of traffic, it happens, right, on the submission page, right, the submission forms. And no doubt, there are totally writers who want fast responses, who cannot wait, X amount of months, or don't want to wait that time at all. They want to get that decision, as soon as possible, you know. Totally, and some writers have personal life events, things, maybe coming up and things of that nature, and maybe they want to get that response fast too, who knows. There are multiple reasons why someone may choose a fast response, for personal reasons, maybe they have other things, that in the future, right? And they want to know now, right? They want to get that decision now rather than wait 12 months, 6 months, and yeah. So I think just, if you don't, feel like, if you feel like, it's gonna financially put you in a bad place, 10 bucks, 25 bucks here, things like that, totally, don't feel pressured to do those things, expedite response options or things of that nature, you know, only feel comfortable, doing what you can, don't feel like you have to choose that expert response option. Again, it should have no impact on the decision, right? It should come down to the quality of your work. So there is an element, no doubt, of unfairness with the expedited submission option, right? Because not everyone has, 3, 5, 10, $25 to spare. Again, for everyone in the world, right? Typically, right? Every dollar counts, but no doubt, not everyone's, personal financial situation, life events are the same, and it can be really hard to, give up that money, right? Someone's hard work earned money, you're giving it to a lit mag journal, right? And you're taking a risk, right? Because, it's going to come down to the quality of your work, right? And it's not easy getting an acceptance in general, right, from a lit mag journal. So don't feel like, giving a large tip, again, paying expedite submission fees, coughing up fees and stuff is going to give you a better chance. It's not, again, it's going to, I'm saying this multiple times, and support is going to come down to the quality of your work, whether it's a fit for the lit mag or journal. And of course, there are, lit magazine journals have limited slots for print issues, and some typically a set amount of pieces for each section. I've seen too. So, ask yourself, is it something, again, it comes to that question, is it a need or a want, right, for you? In most cases, I think, you could wait it out, you could be patient and wait for that decision, and just follow up if it goes past that time, and keep tabs on it. It's important to, have a good, tracking system. Smithsville has a tracking system. I mentioned others in an article, right? The dual trope, chill subs tracker, right? You could, typically a lot of poets and writers still keep a backup Excel spreadsheet, right, of all their submissions and the places they submitted to, any fees they paid, expedited, or, to keep track of that. Of course, the submission man systems typically will have records of that, and things of that nature, but um not all. And yeah, so, just keep that in mind. And some lit mag journals use PayPal for expedited response options and stuff. But again, I think it's really nice, the ways you can configure it in Subfolio. I feel like, for sure, when dealing with expedited response options and things of that nature, and enabling optional tips and stuff. Again, all of this, what I'm talking about, should be optional. I did make an article on, tip jar methods and platforms, and tip jars and donation platforms, for lit magazine journals, covering, that aspect of, for nonprofit lit magazine journals and organizations, and then also those that are not nonprofit, so if you're interested, you can, make a pit stop to my Substack and find that. But more so, I wanted to talk about expedited submission fees on this podcast. And typically, when you go into the submission form, you will see other additional services or options that lit magazine journals have to offer. And I think, feedback, getting feedback from lit magazine journals, I think that has more value, for some writers and poets, looking to grow their career, or to, have growth in, the writing world. I think feedback can be absolutely a need for some, because they don't know maybe the reason, right? They want to know the reason. So in the aspect of, they need to know to help them grow, right? Or they also could want to know because they're curious why their piece maybe keeps getting declined, right? Maybe they've sent this piece to other places. I think that has much more value, right? Score reviews, feedback shares, right, than expedited submission options. There's more value to editorial feedback options than expedited submission fees. And again, there is no doubt, For sure, there's an element of unfairness. I agree. The others who had brought this up, I was chatting with, in an email with someone, and then also another individual. So yeah, absolutely, there is an element of unfairness, to the expert submission fee option, because not everyone has the same level of, not everyone has the same financial situation or income. And it shouldn't, when you're running a publication, or a series of some kind, it's important to create as little barriers as possible, and to make sure it's as fair as possible for everyone, right, submitting, right. And I think when you're including that option, there is an element of unfairness there, a little bit, right, because someone is jumping the line to maybe snag that last slot. Maybe it's for a print issue or something, versus someone who was like behind them, right, in that, in the lineup of submissions, you know and yeah, so that does, totally. So yeah, but all publications, right, with those expedited options and stuff, they use it towards operational expenses, helping keeping things running. And in return, right, those who chose that option get a fast decision. But again, I think it's so important to be creative with all the other ways you could go about sustaining the publication. And you can offer additional services, other things, in that submission form, through your submission management platform. Just make sure you're complying with the wording of whatever system you're using, again, and any integrations it has. You have to be mindful about that. One thing that comes up, is ensuring you're saying tips, right? Tip jar, right? If you're not a nonprofit, right? So yeah, just reiterating that again. So yeah, it's really up to you. If you're looking to start your limited journal and want to have expedited options implemented, no doubt there are, as you saw, right, quite a few lit magazine journals out there that still have expedited submission options available. And totally, there are writers out there, even visual art magazines and stuff of that nature, where others will pay that amount for a fast decision. Some absolutely cannot wait. They want to know as soon as possible, or however, next day options. I think those are really hard for lit magazine journals to juggle. I think 1 to 2 weeks, expedited options are more manageable if you're going to have it or something like that. Um, but yeah, so it's something I don't choose anymore. If hypothetically, if I were to submit to a place nowadays or something, I just don't choose it anymore personally, because I'm not in a place financially to really do that myself per se. And I feel like that could go towards other things for sure. No doubt, prices have gone up in general in the world, and there's a lot, we all have expenses in our life and stuff, right? Totally. So you have to be mindful about how you're spending your hard-earned money, and things of that nature. Really think about it. Can you wait, just wait it out, and see what happens. It's not, again, going to change. It's not going to weigh in on the outcome at all. Again, your work is being looked at, right? Whether it's a fit for the Littman Journal, and the quality of it. So at the end of the day, right? So it's not going to give you, it's not and should not give you a better chance at all when you're submitting to a lit journal, when you choose that expedite response option. So I would say $3 is not too bad, 3 5 bucks expedite response options. With my lit journal, right, I set up, the last time I had our splash pass enabled, right, at Dippy Lit Mag, right, it was set to $11, and yeah, I I discontinued it, and I will see. For now, I don't know. I temporarily restructured things for my lit mag and journal. And temporary discontinuing of volunteer staff. It's manageable, the queue I have now and stuff. But there are other personal reasons on the back end of why I did that. I absolutely loved having a team, and it's a lot of fun for sure. But there are some things I'm and dealing with personally that maybe I'll discuss a bit further in a future episode when I'm ready to talk about, because it impacted my decision to do that until other things, in my life personally. So, I started running my lit mag journal, solo by myself. And, I'm not receiving several thousand submissions a month or anything at my own lit mag journal. So it is manageable, the queue and stuff. But I do miss having a volunteer staff. It's a different atmosphere dynamic, right, to the queue and stuff and everything. But nothing heavily has changed at my lit manual journal. It's just, temporarily, not having a staff for the remainder of this year thus far. For now, we'll see. And then I took out our splash pass, our expert response options. I discontinued that and added just a few other additional, service options, essentially, right? Additional options in the sense that there is a bite-sized, feedback. I can share the score, right? The scoring of the piece, and that gives insight to the poet or writer, into the decision, where maybe the editor is coming from. There's also, right, occasionally I'll open up an editorial detailed feedback option where I give one page of feedback, right? And in the past, I had it set up where it was like, team feedback, and then someone could request maybe audio feedback from me. And totally, I've done quite a bit of audio feedback to poets as an additional option. I think that is another way to, have other things in place instead of submission fees, and enabling an optional tip jar, reiterating other places, that poets can give support, or even, facilitating, some bonus items out on a Substack or something like that. That's what some lit mag journals do. I cover a list of other, a list of options, in my guidebook, right? Of what you could do, additional services and options, to help sustain your publication. So totally, if that interests you, again, you can, get the downloadable version, pick up the print version. I did the best I could with it. And yeah, so I hope that helped, answering that. So yeah, no doubt there is, again, an element of, you know, um, there is an element of unfairness. It is, I would say, it is leaning towards that being unethical in nature. So yeah, someone at the back of the line of submissions, right? Maybe their piece again is really awesome and superb, and someone chose an expedited option, and maybe they snagged again the last slot in a print issue, right? That could happen, hypothetically. So again, it shouldn't, and I feel like, that whole pay to play thing is very difficult, right? It shouldn't feel that way, in the lit mag world. I don't like fees, and it's hard, but it no doubt it's challenging to sustain a publication. Again, you have to get creative with everything. Some lit mag journals have Patreons, multiple different platforms they use to intake, support, tips, and things of that nature. And a great way, again, to sustain the publication is to offer, editorial options, editorial feedback options, additional services as, writers are submitting on the form itself, and I've covered in this podcast, different submission management, intake systems, right, that you could look at, right, for doing that, collectively, right. And yeah. So yeah, that's expedite submissions option. I was just showing, a couple different examples out there, Cleaver Magazine, Split Lip Mag, Bull, and yeah, Poetry Online, After Dinner Conversation, Only Poems, right? I've covered some of those lit mags on the podcast, not all, so you could, look at episode 112, 89, where I talk about those lit mags, and 37. I have not covered Split Lip yet, or Bull, or Cleaver Magazine, but their expedite submission options caught my eyes, so I wanted to talk about those. And yeah, it helps to see different examples, when you're maybe starting your own lit mag journal. And yeah, so again, if you feel that expedite submission options are unethical or unfair, right, then or wouldn't do choose that option yourself, then don't have that, at your lit mag journal. And it's always okay to restructure lit mag journal, to adjust things over the years. No one's saying you can't do that. You can reboot your lit mag, relaunch it, and change the direction of it. You have the right to do so. But just, whenever you're dealing with fees or there's hard earned money, being mindful about that, explicitly state your refund policies, what happens if, things are not, given back in the guaranteed time frame, things of that nature, or just be communicative about delays with issues with, calls and things of that nature, or things pushed back. Sometimes lit magazine journals, maybe they don't hit their caps, or haven't filled an issue and they have to extend calls, things of that nature, right? So just be communicative and be honest and upfront, and be transparent, right? Totally. When you're running your lit mag journal, when you're dealing with others' hard earned money, right? Totally. So it's super important, to set up your lit mag journal, to have, absolutely, there's a code of ethics, when running anything, a business or a lit mag journal or anything you start, right? There are, things that are, right and wrong, right? Tips should be optional. Additional services should all be optional, right? For others to pick off from, it's up to them, if they want to choose those options, and if you're going to implement something and say, I'll get back to you within this time frame, follow through with that. And if you miss that, I think it's only fair, right? Like with expedite options, to give a refund, totally. So yeah, just some things to think about. So I just wanted to talk about expedited submission fees and, that a little bit. So I hope seeing these examples helped. Yeah. And I will add here, so, ask yourself this, right? Do expedited submission options, paid expedited submission options, benefit anyone? Yeah, sure. There are poets and writers, right, that maybe need to, have a fast decision. Maybe again, they have life events or other things, going on, and they want to hear back faster rather than later. Maybe they have a very busy, chaotic schedule, other personal events, a lot of things happening later in the year. And maybe they don't want to wait, a full year, or down the road, 6 to 12 months. That can be an awfully long time, to hear back. But I would say in most cases, you could wait it out, for sure, to wait to hear back on a decision and use that money for other things in your life. Again, it can add up fast. Again, I'm not saying any lit mag journal that implements these is off or anything like that. Again, absolutely, lit mag journals have to get creative and offer additional options. I think lit mag that does a good job of doing that, and other ones out there, right? Again, Cleaver Magazine, I think they offer classes and some other things. There are lit magazine journals out there that also offer, workshops and things of that nature, right? And classes, totally. I've seen some that are free, some that are, $50, some that are 100 to $200, and, some lit magazine journals, perhaps, pay whoever's hosting that workshop and maybe split, the workshop registration fees or something like that. I don't know how, others have done the facilitation of that or the structure of the, that portion of it. But, that's one way. Again, additional services, additional workshops, editorial feedback, right? I put together lists of things, right, in my guidebook. I wrote an article, right, on, tip jars and, nonprofit lit mags, and donation platforms and systems and things of that nature, right? So it definitely helps, on your lit mag journal to offer more than one way that others can leave a tip or support your publication, and yeah, additional services, just think about that, alternatives, if you're looking to start your own lit journal, think about, again, the additional services, the options you could provide that have, value that others could find, from having that. No doubt, if you give feedback to others, if you give a score, a decline letter, all of that, right? There, no doubt, there's still going to be maybe some writers, some artists out there that get upset or angry, with you. And, you do the best you can, no matter what, maybe you gave, pretty good feedback and, and again, it was constructive feedback, right, to the poet or writer. There still may be some writers or poets or individuals out there, human beings, right, who get upset or angry about the decision no matter what, so just keep that in mind. Maybe they'll leave a bad review or things. It's bound to happen. It can happen, in the lit mag world, so, just know you do the best you can and just be, again, transparent, honest, When you're submitting to a lit mag journal, think about this way, from a submitter perspective, if you're an editor listening to this, right, you wouldn't want to get gypped by a lit mag journal or feel like you were cheated out of money, or that you submitted to a con artist or anything like that, right? And again, I'm not saying any lit mag journal that I shared on my screen or anything like that is a bad lit mag journal or anything like that, or scamming others. No, I'm not too familiar with some of these lit mags on my screen. I haven't, looked at all of them thoroughly or anything like that. Some of them I've covered on the series and I'm aware of. And they absolutely, some like Only Poems, After Dinner Conversation. In the past I have interacted with Poetry Online and Split Lit Mag, and totally, so I'm not saying, any of these publications are bad. I'm just saying, when you're setting up your lit mag or journal, make sure that, you're structuring a way that is, fair for everyone. I think that's important to have that established. It's cool to see publications that are inclusive, diverse, right? For sure. And, submission fees, right? As I mentioned in episode 51 and covered that, even mentioned it, I think, in 35, more so in episode 51, about how submission fees, right, create a barrier for others, right? And these expedite options, right, are optional, right? Tips should be optional, right? But again, when someone's getting a faster decision than others, right, that's not, um, an equal opportunity per se, right? Because let's say someone has, right, like less than $100 in their bank account, right? And they have to save that money, right, to pay their bills, or maybe they're tight on money or looking for employment. Maybe they're in a really bad situation, right? Then absolutely, they're not going to, do that expedite option, right? There's no way they would be able to do that. And I think it's really, tough times, right? Yeah, absolutely. Across people's lives, their ups and downs, really tough times, and it's not easy by any means, both for lit mags and journals and, submitters, on both sides. There are bills, everyone has bills and things typically, right? So yeah, it's really tough. So no doubt, I did try, implementing a expedite option in my lit mag and journal, and we didn't have several hundreds choose it or anything like that. There were poets and writers that did choose that option, and it went back to the publication and think, totally, and our operational expenses. And anytime I missed the expedite option, I gave a refund back. So if you're going to implement things with when you're dealing with fees and others hard earned money, again, just have a clear, refund policy. Are all fees non-refundable if the expedited submission is missed past the date, right? Just specify, like, are you going to give the money back, right? Are you going to honor that agreement, right? Just make sure you do. That's all. And yeah, so I just wanted to talk about expedited submissions, a little bit on this podcast. I mean, you've seen it, while I was showing you around some of the past lit magazine journals, right, on the series, earlier in the series for sure. And yeah, so I think personally, $25 is on the higher end for sure for expedite submission fees. At most, back when I was submitting places, I chose, I chose $3, quite a bit. But looking back, I wouldn't have done it. You can lose quite a bit of money doing that expedite submission options, for sure. And it's you have to think about, right, yeah. So um yeah, again, you could do a lot. Totally, you could do a lot with $25. Think about, there are lit magazine journals that have, minimal fees, and you could submit to a lot of places with $25. Think about that too. Yeah. um or use that money for something else. Totally, it's up to you. But yeah, looking back, I wouldn't have, when I started submitting the places, I wouldn't have chose the expedited submission option, at all. Yeah, but that's just me personally. And for now I've discontinued that in my own lit mag or journal, or expedited option again. I have restructured things compared to, what the lit mag was back in 2022 and 23, my own, dippity. So I'm not saying not to do the expedited option again, with these lit mags or journals that I've shared. It's really up to you, if you absolutely feel you need or want to, get an expedited response, And I think it's always a good idea to clarify, when you have like um, additional options here, right? Also, right, that, the feedback and stuff, is that all collectively going to be given at the same time of the fast response option, or is that going to come after, right? So, yeah, anytime you include an additional option or service, right, always, it's a good idea to put, right, the expected time frame, you'll get everything together, right? The decision, the feedback, all of that, when someone should expect to, get a reply or decision, right? Fast response, only poems are showing 2 to 3 weeks, it's up to you, based on the volume you have and the submissions. I think 1 to 2 weeks is manageable, 2 to 3 weeks is manageable for fast response if you're going to include that. 24 hours, 72 hours, that gets kind of hard to maintain for sure. 3 days responses, 24 hours, that can be a bit tough, So make sure you give yourself, if you're going to include other options and services, give yourself breathing room, manageable for your schedule. Maybe if you have a staff as well, make sure it's manageable for them. Fast passes, responses, typically those go straight to the editor, or a fast decision from an editor on the team, So, yeah. Anyways, yeah, so I just wanted to talk about, expedite submissions, give a couple examples out there, because no doubt, quite a few lit mags and journals, right, have that option, set up, or available, on their lit mag or journal submission landing page. I mentioned these things in my guidebook again in some articles I've typed out, and I hope it helps, just talking this out, So yeah, just something to take in consideration, if you're going to set up your own lit mag journal, if it's print, online, or both, yeah, I fuel expedite options, again, you could lose quite a bit of money on those. I know I did personally back when I started, submitting to places. So it's not something personally I would do anymore. If I were a submitter nowadays and stuff, no one has an infinite supply of money or anything like that, right? So keep that in mind. And, so those options, those services you're choosing, if you're going to choose one, make sure, it's something you're getting value from. And I think editorial feedback is worth it, there's value from that, if you're looking to grow in your writing career, or, make a career out of writing, or even if you're someone, not sure why you keep getting declines, right? It could help to have insightful feedback from someone, right? But not all lit mags or journals offer feedback, right, as an additional option, right? Here we just see, right, poetry online is just giving an expedited decision, right? There's nothing else to choose from that. It's just expedited decision. Sometimes I've seen lit mags and journals, with the expedited option, what they'll do, not all, but, maybe they, sometimes when you submit 3 poems to them, they'll tell you what the fave was, or the strongest poem they felt from the batch was, or between 2 or 3 poems, if they allowed up to 3 poems, right? Um, I I can't remember which lit mag journal did that, but that's something I used to do, And yeah, the additional option you could offer, is to state, if it's a submission call where others, can submit up to 3 poems, right? You can give a paid option to reveal what was the favorite or strongest poem from the submission. Although it got declined, there's, maybe there's a poem that they really loved out of the group still, but it wasn't quite there yet, probably needs more than a few minor edits, right? So it's not quite ready for publication. We could share what the strongest poem was, and maybe that's a paid option, or maybe that's something you offer in addition with the expedited option. It could be, not all the magazine journals do that, so I think it's really nice, what Only Poems does, having these other options available all collectively packed together. And that can be a great way to sustain your lit matter journal, giving others options on the submission landing page. There's a lot of traffic that goes through there, and yeah, again, the important word here is optional on all of these, right? Optional, optional. And this is the fast response page, right? So then there's right, the $10 at the bottom, right? And no doubt, right, Only Poems has windows where, there's no fees and things like that. They have contests, other things, with fees and, a mixture, right? So just be mindful about that. And, yeah. So that's all. Just So that's all. I just wanted to give a couple different examples again of expedite submission fees, talk through, and yeah, so just something to think about, when you're starting your own lit merge journal, if you're listing this, or even if you're a submitter, thinking about the expedite submission option, just again, think about whether you really want to do that. It's not absolutely necessary. Again, I feel like because they should be looking at right your work, right, no matter what. You could end up doing the expedite submission options, still again resulting in decline. Maybe your work doesn't fit the issue, or it's not what the publication is looking for, or maybe they feel it's not strong enough to move forward, right? So keep that in mind. You could end up losing that 25 bucks. You're not going to get it back if they met the time of the decision, and everything was given on time, right? So you're out 25 bucks then, or however much it is, 10, 20 bucks. So I'm not saying not to do it. Totally, I myself have tried the expedite options over the years, and I've seen, by the way, expedite options the past couple of years go up at some lit mags and journals for sure. I've seen some start off with $5, then they raised it to $10, then they raised it to 25 bucks. I'm not talking about Cleaver magazine, but I'm just talking about I've seen some lit mags and journals do that, over the years, because of rising cost, right, in the world. And operational expenses grow up, right? Typically what I'm not talking about just lit mags and journals, but what businesses typically do, right? As expenses go up, right, to operational expenses, right? Then they have to adjust and structure things to sustain it, right? Or add more options, and again be creative with other things they can do to sustain it. Again, maybe that's workshops, classes, editorial feedback, again, you could offer other things tied to the submission, like a paid option to share what the strongest poem was from a group of three, or maybe they submitted a batch of poems, and allotted amount, the max amount allowed at that lit mag or journal. So other things, I've shared that I do currently write score reveals. They can have a score reveal or a bite-sized summary comment from me, or an editor, right, back when I had a team, right. They can get just their score if they'd like. We used to just do at my lit mag, right, just a score reveal as a paid option, or to choose between that and sharing reader comment shares, a bite-sized summary. And then there's a separate bucket for detailed feedback. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways you could go about that, in place of, an expedite submission option. You think about alternatives to it, if you really are someone who doesn't like expedite submission options. So yeah, that's the coverage on expedite submission fees. Yeah, and I just wanted to show a couple different setups for sure. Again, you can find more lit mags and journals that have those setups through discover pages and searching. And yeah, not all submission management systems have discover pages, but there are at least three I'm aware of, right? Submittable, Subfolio, and uh, Duo Suma has a discover page. But if you do a general search on expedite submissions, on type lit mags, right, you'll come across some for sure, right, right off the bat. And yeah, so not everyone loves expedite submission fees. It's one of those things, right? Again, dealing with money. So anytime you have money involved, it's um, yeah, I've seen poets again get upset, with expedite submission fees. They felt their piece was super strong. So yeah, I've heard stories, right, of poets and writers, right, choosing the expedite submission option, right, and thinking their piece was super strong, and they thought they were getting acceptance, and they were out, you know, that amount of money, right? It could be 10 bucks, 25 bucks, right? For that expedite option, right? And they're not going to get that money back. So just thing to think about, right? It's a risk you take when submitting to a place. So just be careful, of course, when you're submitting. Again, just because a publication has, additional services and options, or offers expedite submission option, that doesn't mean it's a bad publication, or is awful or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. No doubt it does. Again, I think there is an element of unfairness to it if you think about it, right? Because think about it, not everyone has the same financial situation, right? And again, skipping the line, right? That it's kind of it doesn't feel to me fully ethical to, right? So for now I've discontinued mine. Not to say I'm not going to add other options, or services, but for now that expedite option at my own lit mag, I've discontinued it for the decision I've come to. I just don't feel it's right at this time, or anything like that. I don't want to continue it. So yeah, for right now at this time, I've discontinued the expedite option at my own lit mag, and I'm not telling everyone to discontinue theirs and things like that. It's really up to them, you know. A lot of publications, lit magazine journals use the expedite option, right, towards expenses, towards, I'm sure, helping pay writers for their work if they do pay writers for acceptance or per piece, or, per acceptance or per accepted piece, depends how the lit mag's structured. But yeah, it's something to think about again, So I just wanted to talk through it, share my thoughts on expedite submission fees. And yeah, it's something I discontinued, quite recently this summer. Again, another thing I discontinued. So yeah, again, still, if you're a fee-free publication, if you give decisions back on time, if you do everything like that, you still, again, as I just shared on the series, you still may have upset submitters, others who were upset or angry that they got a decline or rejection, right? And I would say that, just keep trying, no one's work sucks, don't feel like, when you're submitting places that you have to cough up money, again, there are a lot of fee-free places, totally. Some of these publications I've shared, these lit magazine journals, not all of them on my screen, but some of them do have, again, fee-free windows or fee-free opportunities. So, it's all about waiting, I think, being patient and things like that for those windows. And, general submissions, right? Again, there are typically really long wait times at lit magazine journals, especially the ones that, have honorariums or pay writers for their work, right? Those typically I've seen have quite long wait times, or ones that receive several um, hundred submissions a month or thousands across the year. There are longer wait times. So it's just bound to happen. I think, again, if you can wait it out, you can save some money, if you just wait for a decision, solely, and follow up if it's past their average decision time. That's it, um, but yeah, I just wanted to talk through it, yeah, because it's totally, something that comes up in the lit mag world when you're submitting or visiting some lit mags. You may see that expedite option, and it may cross your mind, as a new submitter, should I do this or not? And again, you shouldn't, empty your bank account or anything like that submitting to lit mags or journals, or drain, it shouldn't put a drain on you financially when you're submitting lit mags or journals. Again, look for the free opportunities first. If you absolutely need feedback, if you want to get feedback on your work, there are one-on-one services that lit mags or journals have. Even some of them, even Chill Subs has some events and things like that too, to help submitters and things of that nature, navigating the space and things. So just keep that in mind, and I hope this helped you. Yeah. I would say just be wary of, right, really high expedite submission fees. I personally wouldn't, cough up 20 25 bucks. Back when I started submitting, yeah, I did, again. So I would just be wary of like super, super high fees, right? $3 again, I think that's not too bad. If you want to try expedite submissions one time with a publication, go for it, try it. I'm not saying not to, but just keep in mind, that money's not probably going to come back to you, there, especially, there's a chance, it's a risk you're taking. And yeah, just keep that in mind. It's really hard to get an acceptance, in general, and you got to keep trying, but don't, I wouldn't say do the expedite option for every single lit mag in journal you see that offers it, because you can be out of a lot of money quite a bit, it can add up fairly quickly, even submission fees, right, and things of that nature. But no doubt there are some lit mags and journals that have gotten really creative and have some nice things, for sure, that I think are beneficial, that that are beneficial to submitters, no doubt, for sure. Like 10 hand pit lit mag submission racks. I think that's nice, Only Poems has that. They've added a lot of additional options they've added a lot of additional options that I can choose from, right? Another great way to support the publication and help keep it going for sure. So, expedited options are not the only way, fast responses, for 10 bucks, sure, that can, so yeah, fast responses aren't the only way, but quite a lot of lit mags and journals do. But yeah, quite a few, quite a lot of lit mags like only poems, right? After dinner conversation, some of the ones I covered, right, offer expedited submission options. So I just wanted to make sure I covered it on the series because it does come up, So take care, guys, and bye, yeah. And P.S., guys, just one more thing I want to mention. So, remember, I don't know if this is for, Cleaver Magazine or any of the ones I've covered. I can't recall off the top of my head. But just keep in mind, there's a thing called, right, simultaneous submission. So some lit magazine journals will, totally be okay with, not all, will be okay with you submitting a piece you submitted to them somewhere else, and if you're, not so keen on waiting it out 6 to 12 months, it's, as long as, that lit marriage journal you submitted the work to doesn't have a policy around that, right? You could take that piece or your submissions, maybe it's 3 poems or however many you submitted to that lit marriage journal, take those poems, submit it, those, keep track of them, right? Where you're submitting them, of course. Take those poems, submit them somewhere else, right? And maybe that place gets back to you faster, and that could happen, or it could result in uh between those two places you submit, or multiple places, maybe one of them gives you an acceptance on one of those poems, and maybe they get declined everywhere else, and maybe you're still waiting to hear back on that one that has the longest response time. It could happen, situations like that. It's not to say you couldn't, depending upon the lit mag journal's policy, right? Look for that, if they permit simultaneous submissions or not, yeah, and just make sure you draw pieces that are accepted elsewhere, or depending upon what the lit journal, wants when a piece has been accepted elsewhere, what they want you to do. Some places will tell you just inform them. Some places will tell you to withdraw that piece, if it's been accepted elsewhere and you're going to move forward with that publication, at that other lit journal. So just keep that in mind. If you don't like waiting, you could take those pieces, submit them elsewhere, and every Litman journal again doesn't have the same identical response time, no doubt. So, yeah, so that's what a lot of writers, artists do. End up doing. They take their work and submit it to more than one place. But absolutely, keep track of that. And keep tabs on if you're submitting places the same pieces, at the same time. You want to keep tabs on that, appropriately withdraw or inform the publication, how they want to be informed about that, and yeah, that's pretty much it. I just wanted to make a reminder about that. And just wanted to also say I did have a search up of a page of fast response, on Submittable under the Discover Opportunities page. And you can see, yeah, uh, it may get cut off the bottom of my screen or might not. But you can see here, Violet Winding Stars Press. They have a 24-hour fast response submission option, $6.99. And then they also have a 2-week fast response manuscript submission option, which is $18. So yeah, again, presses and magazines, right? They sometimes will come up through Discover Opportunities pages if you search for, fast response or, expedited options. Now, totally, there are fast response options, here, right? For underrepresented writers as well. There doesn't appear to be a fee on these, but again, sometimes you have to click in to see a bit further for sure. And yeah, so that's all I wanted to tack on. And in regards to chill subs, this is Cleaver Magazine's chill subs profile page. So again, you can see the response times here, right? And the reported response time. So the thing, I think, I don't know if chill subs, I can't recall. It's been quite some time since I've entered in a decision myself or anything like that into the tracker stats section, when you have a chill subs profile, but I don't think it takes into account, those who have chosen the expedited response option, or if there's a way for, writers, artists, etc., to note that, that they chose an expedited response option with that lit mag or journal at the time they submitted, because I think that impacts that, I think that does. So I don't know if they have anything to really address that to date. It's been some time since I've done a chill subs tracker stat decision myself. So I don't know. That's something to take into account. Anyone who has used the stats and tracker on there, or any of those expedited response options that were chosen. But anyways, yeah. That's just something to think about too. So yeah, I just wanted to cover that and go over that and share that with you guys. Not always, again, lit magazine journals will create, separate buckets for expedited response options. Again, there are some, like that will have check boxes for that as well, when you click into the form or something, so it's not always like this. And yeah. Keep in mind with like some submission management systems, like Submittal, for instance, like they have caps on how many buckets lit magazine journals can have open based on their plan that they're on. And so, yeah, I think that's why some lit magazine journals resort to check boxes more so for other options and things. But again, there are form systems, a lot of different ones out there, right? So again, circle back to past podcast episodes and you'll come across me talking through that a little bit further, submission man systems and their features. And I created a couple playlists to section everything off again. And by the way, guys, back on Only Poems, I just want to share real quick. So on their submission portal, I don't know, there's something wonky earlier on the other page I was on. I think it was just a linkage thing. So, on their submissions page here, right, the one without the tiles you saw me click on, they have, right, submissions are open in these categories. You can see they have their fast response po of the week, that's always open. And then the free subs po of the week, right, that has a deadline of July 31st. So yeah, again, some lit magazine journals totally do that. They'll keep their fast response option, always up or open and available. And then their free subs will have, certain cutoff points, right? Totally. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that because I think I'd lost some bit of my audio earlier to cut out. So yeah, and then I was navigating back around. So yeah, I just wanted to clarify that, again, they have the free subs option po of the week, and then they always have, right, again, a fast response option that's open, where they guarantee apply within 2 to 3 weeks for $10 as of July 2026. That's what it's showing and everything. Yeah. So yeah, take care, guys, and signing off now.